Hello everyone, this is update for March 4, 2024, day 740 of the war and of the date update. Also catch up for March 3rd and 2nd. So I'm going to start with ominous news out of Belarus and Russia. Belarus is a country that's straight north of Ukraine. So there, Belarus President Lukashenko signed a decree that lays out how the government authorities or government bureaucracy is going to switch is going to function during wartime. Obviously, as you can imagine, this doesn't happen when country is preparing for peace. So far, Belarus wasn't actively engaged in the war. It was sort of more passively supporting Russia, but there was no active involvement. And it may not mean involvement with Ukraine, may mean involvement with Baltic states or Poland. So remains to be seen, but it's a clearly ominous sign there. Then there's another ominous sign out of Russia. On March 6th, Russian Civil Defense Ministry will run a countrywide alert system. Basically, everything is going to be, there will be a signal that goes through every single system, through radio, TV, I don't know, whatever else, the wireless system, and so on, notifying about danger, imminent danger. So it's obvious again, this is a dry run of the system in the case of war, and obviously this type of system usually run during the nuclear war. So again, pretty ominous sign out of there as well, and especially given that how they coincide in time. Now I'm going to switch to the situation in Ukraine on the battlefield, just general sort of directional information. So far, Russian attacks stalled. It doesn't mean that they stopped. It's sort of natural progression how they work. So because Russian army, Russian commanders, Russian military, they not prepared to execute sort of proper offensives, how they done during, let's say, World War II is probably better. Actually, World War I, at the beginning of World War I also could be relevant. But in any case, they're not capable. So the way the sort of modus operandi is basically attack Ukrainian defenses until Ukrainian side is being bled wide. And then sort of there is natural collapse of the front line just because there's not enough defenders. And that's how Russian troops kind of like breach through Ukrainian defenses. This is effectively how things work. Russian side also suffers a significant number of casualties in this process, but the point is that, again, this is what the Russian side is playing war of attrition, which really means that this is how it works. The Russian side can't afford to lose roughly equal number of people, even more, 2 times more, still okay. The point is that that initial stage Russian side is actually suffering significantly more than Ukrainian side, but eventually, once Ukrainian defenses are becoming thin, and during the time of the collapse, the casualties that Ukrainian side is suffering also become extremely high, and so it kind of like, if you look at the sort of from the start till the end of this process, the casualties roughly the same. Probably a little bit more on the Russian side, let's say 1 to 1.5, but overall it's still net positive for Russia because it has significant advantage people-wise. So that's why this rigid defense, this approach for Ukrainian army simply doesn't work in the long run. So in the short run, it just effectively this is exchange of people for time from Ukrainian perspective. But this is bad approach in the first place. But let's say if Ukrainian command is doing that, at least if it would be worth it if there is sort of something else is being prepared to replace this approach. But unfortunately, there's nothing being prepared to replace this, and this all this really means is a gradual decline, which will turn into exponential disaster at some point, and it's not far away. It's impossible to predict timing, but it's sort of up in the air, and most people in Ukraine feel the same way. So now I'm gonna walk through the front line actually in a clockwise fashion, the way I always do. So first situation along the state border remains more or less the same. Nothing sort of extraordinary there, just normal exchange of hostile activities, let's put it this way. Now let's move to the North Lugansk front line. This section of the front line is relatively quieter. There are probing attacks on Russian side in typical sort of areas. One is towards this road, on the road towards Kupiansk, so from the southeast, and then the other one from northeast, so the pressure points from two, but this is relatively weak and more closer to probing pressure. Then there is more mild pressure here towards Terner. Actually, Russian troops are slowly but surely advancing there. They are not in the villages being reported by Russian propaganda channels, but they slowly but surely approaching it. Eventually, if things go in linear fashion, they eventually will get to village Ternim. Now let's move south. Let's look at North Donbass front line. Here, surprising, strange attacks towards Bilohorivka. They don't have any logical explanation, but it's just totally something local that doesn't make any big picture sense. Now the situation in this area straight west of Bakhmut, Russian troops continuing their pressure. Ukrainian side is in process of losing this village Ivanivske, and I would say closer to losing it. As I mentioned before, Russian troops controlling more than half, so probably at this point Ukrainian troops are fighting somewhere on the western outskirts of Ivanivske, basically hanging by a thread to this village. Beyond that, there is sort of normal pressure here, but again, the point is the point of this pressure is to inflict as many losses to Ukrainian forces as possible. And sort of this, as I said before, this is kind of like a natural sort of process how it works. It's pressure, pressure, pressure until the front line is thin enough, and then it collapses. Now let's move to the central Donbass front line, where there is main area of pressure by Russian side, by Russian command. So Russian troops continuing their pressure in this whole area west of Avdiivka. As I stated before, they stalled, largely due to tactical counterattacks by Ukrainian troops, and they are really, I would say poorly organized counterattacks, but it's enough for Russian side to stall just because they are exhausted as well. They suffered significant losses attempting while capturing Avdiivka. So it's kind of like natural stopping point, but this is just a stopping point, as I stated. And the pressure will mount, it will continue until it grind Ukrainian troops, Ukrainian forces to the point that they cannot hold the line. So this is just the beginning of that process right now. sort of like next natural stopping line. As a side note, I would like to say that U.S. tanks Abrams, they are really excellent from one angle, is that they don't burn when they get hit, or at least it's really hard to get them to burn, so which increases significantly survivability of the crew, and that's really huge and important part of them, and actually unappreciated in generally, but it actually makes crews much more comfortable, much more willing to actually go into fight. So this is a huge positive, and actually it stands out relative to the Soviet tanks such as T-72, T-64, T-80, and T-90 kind of sort of. So it's effectively Soviet tank, which, as you can imagine, they usually end up in sort of fireworks where there is explosion of the ammunition inside, and very frequently most of the crew dies, or majority of the crew dies. So basically it's a kind of like a kamikaze tank in some ways. There are some positive sides of those tanks, but I think from Ukraine perspective, the survivability of the crews is number one priority. Now let's move south. So Russian troops continuing their attacks also west of Marinka. So they recaptured parts of Krasnohorivka. I mentioned before that 3rd Brigade did very local counterattack, pushed out Russian troops, but it didn't last long. As I mentioned before, sort of typical situation of Eastern Front 1944. It's just temporary reprieve, and then the ground is lost. So the same way, Russian troops, again, back in Krasnohorivka, they not controlling it, but they are sort of going through it. Basically, Ukrainian forces are in process of losing it at the very beginning stages, let's put this way. Then Russian troops continuing their attempts to advance straight west of Marinka. So far it's somewhat stalled. Then Russian troops making slow progress in Novomikhailivka. This small town is clearly in process of being lost, and sort of the process is kind of like in the middle of it. So as overall, as you can see, the whole picture is fairly negative. It's just there is no crescendo of negative news. It's just kind of like more, I would say, an slow motion negative news, and eventually it will turn into crescendo. I don't know how soon it's going to be, in a week, 2, 3, but eventually it will turn into something similar what happened with Marinka and Avdiivka in the past. Now let's move to the Zaporizhya front line. Things here are relatively quiet. Ukrainian actually forces managed to push Russian troops a little bit out of Robotyne, so it's kind of like controlled partially by Ukrainian troops, partially by Russian troops. So that's about it. But the point of this whole situation, again, what I mentioned before, is that Russian command does not have enough resources or troops to attack everywhere. So what they do, and which is actually very sound strategy, they pull all of their reserves into essentially 3 areas: west of Bakhmut, west of Avdiivka, and west of Marinka. It's essentially the 3 areas where they put the maximum pressure on Ukrainian forces in hope to basically to create a breach in defenses eventually. So going again, the whole point on Ukrainian side is actually maneuvering with reserves and also shifting forces to areas where the Russian troops are sort of attacking, because those attacks are very primitive in the same area. They're not sort of creative. In theory, they're extremely easy to sort of deflect and actually inflict significant losses. But so far, Ukrainian command simply cannot master that approach. Now let's move to the next section of the front line situation along the Dnipro River. So here the status quo remains, nothing really major here happening at this time. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, and until next time, bye-bye.